Hey there, this is Ross from the Great Updraft, and today we're going to be talking about spiral dynamics. We're going to look at an introduction to the model and discussing the 8 or 9 stages that the model proposes. So, just a little brief overview of spiral dynamics. What spiral dynamics proposes are levels of evolution in human beings in, from what I see, 3 main areas. Now, many authorities in the field say it's only in one area of human growth, which would be values. I actually don't agree. I think it talks about much more than values. I think it covers 3 main areas, which would be values, worldview, and psychology. Regardless of what the areas are, this theory is really powerful for understanding yourself, for understanding the world around you, and for understanding other people. And it can have many effects studying this theory. One is that you just feel more friendly to yourself and to the world around you. You also gain a deeper sense of trust in the process of evolution, because what we'll realize is that these levels go back thousands of years, and we've, as a human species and as individuals in our individual lives, we've been developing through these stages forever. And when you look at the higher stages, we realize, oh, this is actually the future of humanity. So this is very powerful stuff. There's several ways to look at these levels. Now, in a sort of simplified way, we can imagine them as being a person or a character who embodies each level 100%. So often people say, oh yeah, green is like this, or orange is like this. These are, the colours are labels for the levels. We're sort of speaking about them as if it's a person, or as if someone can 100% embody that level, which can be useful just to understand the theory. It's not really very accurate, but it's a good way of understanding it. We can also see them as like a scale of different capacities, or as a scale of evolution, each level in that scale contributes to our wholeness and our integration. And as I said, the first way is as just seeing them as people, as seeing them as like individual people that embody those traits. It helps us understand the theory, helps us understand each of the levels, but in reality, the second way is much more accurate. Humans don't just jump from one level to the next. Really, it's a process of ascension, and it's a process of downloading these ever higher capacities as a human being. And really, when you look back at your own life and you look at how you operate day to day, the second way is really much more accurate description of how things work. I've got plenty of articles explaining each stage in depth, and they're all free. And I'm going to have suggested videos for you during the course of this, but we're going to sum up each of the levels in broad terms in this video. Before we do that, I just want to give some warnings here. So, on the whole, people tend to misinterpret and or oversimplify this model. So, first of all, I think it's really important to notice that the model is an expanding spiral. If you've read the Spiral Dynamics book, the famous book where the original theory is, the picture on the front is a spiral. It's not a series of steps or jumps, stepping stones. What the spiral is telling us is that really growth is a process of ascension, in which the earlier levels, they may fade and go underground, and they even can become shadow. That's another thing that can happen. But they're still alive and well within us. They're still fundamental to our functioning, and the higher levels sit on top of them. That's why it's expanding, because the higher levels come after, but they also include the lower levels. So think of them more like the layers of an onion. Like, the core of the onion is essential to all the other levels. Without the core, the The higher or the outer levels on the outside, they couldn't exist because we need the whole onion to exist for those layers to be there. So when thinking about your growth, the growth of society, the growth of other people, think of it as an onion, as a series of expanding steps that build on top of each other. And that's a much more realistic way of viewing things. Some people think that they are just a series of steps, like, oh, I'm going to jump to the next level and I'll leave that behind and I need to repress everything that came before. That's not really going to do you much good if you think like that. My next warning is a warning against over idealizing the higher levels. So, especially if we're into personal development, that's what the Great Updraft is about. And really, a lot of the material that I write about is focused towards more of the higher levels, really. We often want to run up these levels, where we want to become bigger and greater and stronger and whatever. And that is a legitimate part of growth, as long as it's healthy. It's not like a needy, desperate attempt to grow when it's really not appropriate. It's legitimate to want to grow, but it's not legitimate to try and push away the earlier levels inside us and to deny them and repress them. Actually, what we want to do is we want to integrate as much as possible. So we want to try and become all the levels as much as we can when it's functional, and be able to embody those levels whenever we want to. I'd also say as a warning that it's easy to bullshit yourself, basically. What do I mean by this? When you learn this theory, you're going to realize parts of yourself from all these different levels. And you might realize parts of yourself from the higher levels, like yellow, turquoise, even coral, perhaps. It's easy to cling to those parts of yourself and to create this identity around being yellow or being turquoise. And it's really quite, in a way, it's kind of ridiculous. Because you're not just one of these levels, you're all of the levels all contained in one. And really, the more identified you are with being a certain level, the less flexible you're going to be, and the less able you are to embody all the levels when you need to. Each level contributes something really important to our lives, and it's something really unavoidable as a human being. So don't create this sort of egoic identity around being at a certain level, because it's really just going to have the opposite effect to what you might think it has. We're about to talk about the stages, so just as a final thing, as we're discussing these, I want you to really look and see how this describes your developmental journey, and also look for your current self in these different stages. I also want you to really think about the importance of each level, like the paradigm shift that each later level brings, for example. These levels are very deep, and they illuminate a lot about human life that you've maybe not realized before, or that you've realized before and you've never had a framework for understanding. So let's go into each of the levels now, and we're going to talk about the worldview, the values, the psychology, the context, the footprints, and what a healthy integration might look like in a modern individual. By context, I mean, where do we expect to see this stage in the world? And by footprints, I mean, what are the sort of telltale signs of this stage being active? Some of which are kind of tongue-in-cheek, some of which are tongue-in-cheek but are actually really true and really visible when you look for them. Great, let's start with the first stage in the model, which is stage beige, and this is called survivalistic. The worldview at this level is that the world is one with our basic needs, and that other people around us serve our basic needs. It's called survivalistic because really, at this level, if we are centered there, life really becomes about survival from day to day. The values at this level revolve around satisfying our basic needs like food, warmth, water, sex, and so on. sort of these periodic needs that are essential to really just staying alive. In terms of the psychology, we don't really have a sense of self yet. Like if you look at a young baby, for example, who's just, their main thing is just about getting their basic needs met. There's actually been research that's shown that babies don't have a sense of self in the way that an adult does. They can't, they have their senses, they have the body, they have a little bit of mental functioning, depends on the age of the child, but there's no sense of self-referencing, there's no sense of self-identity. And this isn't in a spiritual sense, this is just in the most basic sense in terms of our basic functioning as a human being. We're also driven by our instincts and sort of animal-like brain systems. So again, it's all to do with our basic survival and our basic needs. In terms of context, where do we see this in human life? We see this dominating in human societies that, for example, the first human societies that ever existed thousands of years ago, before farming existed, really when human beings just roamed the savannah, killing animals and looking after their basic needs, even before real tribes and art and community, really earlier than that. We're talking really the very first human groups. Newborns, so you can see that, again, newborns don't have the sense of self. They're really, their concern is just with, getting the nappy changed, getting food in their mouth, feeling sort of warmth and protection from the mother or father. You can see it in populations of humans that are struggling to meet their basic needs. They're in starvation, or they have some other threat to their basic needs that really puts their survival at risk. Hunter-gatherer bands, as I mentioned, that's really beige in a collective sense, is humans that are struggling to survive in the most basic way. What are sort of some of the footprints of beige? Things like keeping the belly full, that's a basic preoccupation. Procreation for the sake of keeping the species going. Dependence on others. Living off the land. So it's a very basic survival stage. However, how do we healthily integrate this in our lives? We all have beige within us. We have, the brain systems that look after food and water and warmth and so on. We have the emotions associated with those. We have patterns in our life that revolve around beige, or they are, in their most basic form, come from beige. Things like, it's interesting, Ken Wilber made this point about America when he was talking about obesity in America, that is, in a way, we're not even meeting our beige needs in a functional way when we're obese, when we're not feeding ourselves properly, because it's a dysfunctional way of meeting beige. We're not actually attending to the body's needs, where we are being overcome by those beige impulses for food and water and whatnot, and we're meeting them by putting poison into the body. So Ken Wilber's very scathing and talking about how we're not meeting the most fundamental needs, but in a way it's right. Okay, so the second stage is called purple, and this is magical. Now, we can associate magical with human societies that are a little bit more advanced, sort of horticultural societies, tribal societies, third world countries. And the worldview at this stage is really important to understand why it's called magical. What you'll find at this level is that the worldview is about the world is full of sacred objects, and that inanimate objects or natural phenomena like trees and the rain and uh, rivers and so on have that we give them a human identity, and we see that there are gods in the trees, there are gods in the river, and we associate our sense of identity with those things, and that we see that they sort of give us life. This might sound a bit strange, but if you look at tribal cultures, this is what their belief system revolves around. Yet all of that is still centered on survival. So it's like the rain protects us and gives us water. The the sun nourishes us every day. And this is all it's all in a those things are certainly true, but it's all in a very sort of it's almost in a selfish way, as if it looks after our clan and only our clan. And of course, that might sound a bit abstract, but if you look at a baby, for example, or a young child, babies and young children do the same. They attribute life to things like cartoon characters, and they confuse a cartoon character, which is just the something created by a human being, with a real live creature, and they sort of lack they lack the sense of time and the sense of space and the sense of causality that we get when we continue to develop as people. The values at this stage revolve sort of around survival again. If you look at tribal cultures, they have a very they have a sense of loyalty to the clan, to the chief, to the ancestors, to the elders who pass on the wisdom down to them, and they have a sense of reverence, which is which is actually really beautiful. The difficult part is that that can be limiting, and also they fail to see the relevance in the beliefs of other clans and so on. The psychology at this stage is magical thinking. So here we sort of confuse reality with our imagination, and this is a stage when children dress up and pretend they're superheroes and whatnot. It's like it's yeah, magical thinking. We're not sure where our real capacities end and where our imagination begins, and we're not sure about what forces in the world actually contain sort of their own individual life and what doesn't, which is why we attribute life to cartoon characters and rivers and trees and so on. The psychology is also very superstitious, so it's ritualized. It's there's a sort of lack of understanding of how life really works, and it's attributing causality to things that doesn't really make much sense. There's only a basic self-awareness here, so it's like in young children, they've still not really got a full sense of identity. There might be a basic sort of separation from the world, and they might have a sense of object permanence, that the world exists independently of them, which doesn't appear in babies, for example. But it's still, they don't really have a full adult identity, and they don't identify in the way that a fully grown adult would as a separate self. What's the context for this? So I've said tribes and horticultural societies tends to be societies that depend on nature for, and really purely nature alone for their production and survival. And it goes beyond just hunting and gathering. We sort of see a little bit of farming here, but not full blown farming with ploughs and so on. That comes a bit later in the historical timeline. In young children, you can see this. Look out for the signs of magical thinking, the superheroes and the stories about involving characters, and the sort of confusion of life with magic. What are some of the footprints of this stage? Superstition, rituals, crystals and stones, the Virgin Mother as a religious symbol. I'm not going to go into all the details of why that is typical of the magical stage, but we can see in tribal societies that that came up, and it was sort of as a result of a magical view of procreation. That's where the Virgin Mother comes from. Dances and dresses, basic art. So humans are beginning to express themselves, but it's in a sort of basic magical way. What might a healthy integration of purple magic look like? Let me give you a little bit of an example of this. So sometimes when I'm looking up at the night sky, when I go to see the stars, I sort of imagine myself as a tribesman in distant human history, wondering what life was all about. And this is before the times of science, before we even knew that Earth was a planet. What would these people think that life is? And it just opens up this sense of mystery that I really often lose touch with when I'm going about my day-to-day life. This is, I think, one of the things that embodies magical thinking, because we don't have a really complicated worldview that involves like theories and we have sort of an innocent view of life. We're also more deeply connected to the mystery, and we can see this in tribal societies. And we tend to lose this as we become adults and as we go to school and learn about all the theories of the universe and so on. It's good to revive this and to live, even though we have all this knowledge and we've learned a lot and we know that the trees and the rivers and whatnot don't have a magical life of their own. They do in a way, and they don't in another way. There's actually still a lot that we do not know as human beings, and actually curiosity and not knowing are what make life delicious, and it takes us back to our basic humanness that we tend to lose touch with. Another thing about purple magical that I think we can integrate consciously is sort of an atemporal, primitive, visceral sense of belonging to our family and to our sense of our hometown and our country. It's like those basic visceral ties from when we were children that go back to when our memories sort of fade into the distance. This is sort of a purple magic thing. It's like the roots of who we are, and in a sort of social context, and it has a very deep emotional resonance within us. So that's just two ways that you can integrate purple magic in your life. Moving on to stage 3, and this is red impulsive. Now, this is really associated in terms of our individual lives. This is associated with when we get a sense of self that is separate from the world around us. And it's also associated with the time where we start expressing anger and combativeness, for example. The worldview at this level is that the world is a jungle full of threats and predators that I need to fight against. We value domination and manipulation and overcoming other people. And our dominating system is to be aggressive and to be angry and to try and dominate other people, essentially. And we can see this in young children once they reach a certain age, when they start developing the ability to be angry and to fight back and to defend their own needs. This is sort of the roots of it. Sadly as well, this also dominates in groups of people as well. People like criminals and people who can't live within society. I'd even say in travellers, this is quite a common level that is available in travellers. We can see this. They tend to be aggressive. They tend to They don't want to fit into society. They want to just live sort of from day to day selling drugs and whatnot. That's maybe a bit of a generalization when it comes to travelers, but that's been my experience. In empires and autocracies where society is a pretty dangerous place, and there's warlords and there's always war going on, there's people fighting for power all the time. This, a lot of the time, is based on this red impulsive stage. Look out for this in poor areas. In poor areas, we often, or poor suburbs, for example, areas of the city that are poor, there's often this sense of danger and of that you're going to be attacked in any moment. And it's sort of like it's based on the red stage, on like this, it's you or me, it's me, me versus you, and only one of us is getting out alive, kind of thing. Of course, that doesn't mean that it's going to lead to fighting, but this sense of danger, and yeah, it's based on red. What are some of the footprints of red? And look out for this in yourself, in other people, and in society. Anger, aggression, crushing, destroying, blood, wrath, weapons, anger, and so on. And just why this is a level in human psychology, it's quite a long story to explain this, but actually part of where I think it comes from is that when we realize that we are a separate person in our early childhood, it's a very scary moment. It's a scary realization to have, and it's our own fear and our insecurity now becomes projected onto the world, and we start fighting against the world as a sort of coping mechanism for this sense of being this finite thing that has a lifespan. Before that doesn't exist. At the beige and purple levels, we don't have that sense of self. Red is when it comes online. And I think this sort of inflated egoism comes from that sense of threat that we now feel from having our sense of identity. That said, I've been quite negative about it, but what is a healthy integration of red? What does that look like? And actually, red is really important, and it's something that you do not want to repress for very good reasons. I think a healthy integration of red looks like the ability to impose ourselves when we need to. Often, for example, at stage green, we tend to reject red. We tend to reject egoism and looking after ourselves. Defending ourselves when necessary, if that's physical or if it's more verbal or psychological. The feeling of being wild and free and unrestrained and spontaneous in the moment, really not caring at all about what other people think. Of course, that can be expressed in really unhealthy ways, but it can be expressed in healthy ways too. And at the next stage, when we become civilized by blue, that can go underground, and we over-absorb, and we absorb too much the norms and the laws of society. Red is kind of a lawless stage. Can you connect with that sense of lawlessness within you? Not in a criminal sense, but in a more just, in a sense of like, I'm alive, I'm a human being, and I don't care. I don't care what other people think. What am I going to do? And that brought online at later levels, when we have become civilized and we have developed the sense of the moral sense of treating other people as we would like to be treated, can help us tap into our beautiful authenticity and tap into our unique mission in life, free of social programming, free of other people's expectations, and free of caring what other people think. Great. Moving on to stage 4, stage blue, and this is called purposeful. The worldview at this stage is really the polar opposite in a way from what was happening at stage 3, red. At this stage, our worldview sort of expands to a group that we're involved in. For example, our country, or our group of friends, or our school, our community, our church, our spiritual group, for example. And we tend to, our worldview is that that group is the best thing possible. Our country is the greatest in the world. Our country is flawless. Our church group has the truth about religion and about life. And other groups do not have that. We tend to surrender our own red impulses to the higher authority, to this group that has certain rules for how to live life, whether they're written down or whether they're implicit in how the group works. We tend to see that there are two ways of living out life. The way that we follow as part of our group, as part of our school, as part of our church organization, as part of our religious group, as part of our being a citizen of our country, an upright, noble citizen, and everyone else who does not follow those rules. Our values revolve around group identity, about tradition, about upholding the ways of how things are done, around structure, around being civilized and noble and upright and moral. And all that is in our conception of what those things mean. And we tend to be closed to other ways of doing that. Our psychology at this level looks like dichotomizing, filing everything into right and wrong, dogmatic. There's actually in spiral dynamics they call it the role mind. So our identity is composed of the rules we follow and the roles that we play in life, and we feel a certain duty to live by those rules, and it becomes like a moral burden for us. A very common emotion at this stage is guilt. And we should also realize that our self is now sort of merged with the group, and it's not so easy to differentiate ourselves from the group. Other people might look at us and think and see that we're a product of the group that we are part of, and we can't see it. When does this come up in our lives? When I think back, and this is also based on the research that I've done into this stuff, adolescence maybe mid to late childhood and adolescence is when this comes up. It's like we want to be good children. We try to follow what our friends are doing so that we fit in. And from the outside, we look like just a product of the fashions of our time and of the trends in our group. It's not like we have our own separate needs and values and likes and dislikes and so on, and then we choose to belong to part of a group. It's really that we adapt all of those things to belong, and who we are in the group, it starts to sort of blur a little bit. We can see this in agrarian societies, like very rigid societies where farming was the dominant way of survival. This tends to be this is when early religion came around, or early religion in the sense of dogmatic religion under the Ten Commandments or the rule of the Quran and so on. We see it in early empires and city-states which were very hierarchically ordered, and the rigid gender roles and rigid castes and so on. Societies where individuals lack autonomy. Fundamentalist societies run on, a lot of the time it's on blue principles. In God and Bible people who think that Christianity is the only way, the Bible holds the absolute truth for us, and if we don't live by those rules we're going to end up in hell for all eternity. This is this is what you want to look for. It's rigidity. It's about following the rules. It's about obedience to the authority and to the groups that I belong to. Look for collective symbols, so like flags and crosses and emblems. Look for guilt. Look for commandments. This is how things need to be done. And that doesn't need to be in a religious sense. That can just be in an organizational sense. Like, this is how we do things around here. And we're not changing it for anyone. That's sort of a hangover from blue. Can be a good thing, can also be a bad thing. Depends on the context. Look out for righteousness. Like, I recently actually asked a family member what their experience of school was like. I don't know, we were talking about school and our experiences there. And she's an older member in the family, and she told me this was her first response, and her only response to that question was, I did well at school, I was a good little girl. And when she said that to me, I realised that this blue stage is very active in her, because that is her way of measuring her success in school. Not grades, not enjoying school, not making friends. No, being a good girl, following the rules, being obedient, doing what you're told, not speaking when you're not spoken to, that kind of thing. That's a very strong footprint. And it's like we get a sense of pride from following the rules at blue. How can we integrate blue? As I said, sometimes I tend to talk about these earlier levels in a negative sense, and that's for a good reason, but it's also kind of, it skews the picture, because we can healthily integrate each of these stages, including blue. I think one thing that blue gives us is this sense of belongingness. It's like this sense of our identity merging with a group, and that is kind of diluted a little bit. And this is like a very common criticism of social people who criticize society in the modern world, is we've lost this sense of belongingness, this sense of community, because we're all so individualistic. We're too busy competing for the promotion and the money and getting ahead of the Joneses and whatnot. And it's very true. And I'm not saying we need to regress to blue, but maybe we can become more community orientated. We can sacrifice for the community more, and we can find a purpose that goes beyond our own needs. I'm saying this to myself as well, because this is something I try to do every day with the Grey Updraft. It's like a desire to serve for the good of society, to do good, and not to look out, just be looking out for ourselves all the time. That's a beautiful thing. It's a really beautiful thing, and we have lost touch with it. We're, in a sense, in the modern world, one of our issues is we're too busy exploiting other people to do good. And I'm not saying that in agrarian fundamentalist societies they're doing that, but perhaps we can integrate that component and create a better world with all our technology, with the modern world. Can we bring that in? And can you bring it into your life? The other thing that blue gives us in a very sort of basic way is the ability to conform and to be subversive and to live in society. Taking as an example, traveling people again, often they don't have blue I can see that they don't have blue laid down, and that's why they struggle to conform. They just don't want to. They've not lived within a system of blue. Like, they've not went to school and followed the rules. They've not been given a sense of discipline by the family, for example. And as modern human beings, we need that. We need to live within a legal system. We need to follow the rules. We need to pay our taxes. Otherwise, we're just not going to be able to function. So blue helps us tune in to where we are in a social context, and it helps us fit into that context. Great. Talking about the modern world, I think the next stage 5, it really very well describes a lot of the modern world in a in many dimensions. Stage 5 is an individualistic stage. It's about achievement. It's about strategizing. It's about being number one. That's what the that's what our values revolve around at stage 5. When does this come up? It can come up sort of in late adolescence. It depends on your environment. It depends perhaps on your family. It can depend on any number of factors, but it tends to come up when we realize that we can make it in this world. We can become rich. We can earn lots of money. We can have a prestigious career. And when that starts to become our motivating drives in life, our psychology at this stage it's independent. We're independently minded. We want to make things happen. We want to drive things forward. We want to be the linchpin. Entrepreneurial. We're motivated from the inside to go out and achieve things. We thrive on targets and goals. We are driven. We're driven to achievement. We're willing to put the hours in. We're willing to learn, and we're willing to do what it takes to be successful. Our worldview at this stage is that the world is full of opportunities to prosper. You just need to work hard. You just need to know how to make money, and you're going to become rich. The world is seen as a marketplace. It's like, and the world is seen as like a world of competition. If they're not fighting for my cause, they're competition. They're an obstacle, and you can see this in the business world a lot. Also tends to accompany this stage is the idea that truth is observable. It's not found in our groups and what our groups lay down, the groups that we identify with, our country, our religious group, our school, our friendship group. It's more that truth has been measured and observed by authorities, and we follow those authorities. So we tend to value things like science, objective truth. We tend to reject dogma and unscientific ways of looking at the world. In terms of the context of Orange, when did Orange in a historical sense start coming online? You can trace Orange back quite a long way in human society. I'd even say that people like Marcus Aurelius in certain ways were Orange, because it was sort of rational, it's individualistic, it's about very practical advice for us if you've read the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. But really, you can see it in society and philosophy. The big explosion was the Enlightenment period, which started to embody things like universal rights and the idea of rationally finding truth. There was a lot of scientific discoveries in this time. And in modern democracies, when you look at countries like the US and the UK, Germany, Japan, and so on, countries that aren't run so much by religious dogma, but by the economy, by science, by modern technology. These are sort of very rational Orange countries. Individual freedom, look out for individual freedom. That's one of the good things about Orange, is that because we can see that our limited perspective that we held on to at Blue is quite a relative thing. We don't take this relativism too far, but we take it to the point where we say, all right, okay, no, maybe Christians aren't the only viable religious group in the world. Let's start letting Islam exist. Let's start letting Buddhism be around. We're not going to oppress these people. And we can see this in things like rights for black people, rights for women, rights for people with a different sexual orientation, people of different genders. It opens the playing field up to other people, not as green does, but this, if you look back to the Enlightenment, for example, this is when laws started to change to a certain degree around, rights for minority groups and so on. It's not just the rulers and the leaders and the people who have a certain nationality that are going to have power and rights in the society. It's going to be a society for everyone, and we can see that in modern countries. Obviously, we're still growing towards that, but that is the sort of values that come online at Orange. What are the footprints of Orange then? Some of these are going to be quite tongue-in-cheek, but they're there. Money, growth, market economies, the modern look, the suits and the nice sunglasses and the slick haircut and the fast car. Very sort of Orange-driven look or image. Modern countries, modern laws, modern science, rationality. This is all the footprints of Orange. Things like be the best you can be, awaken the inner giant. That's a Tony Robbins book that I saw in a bookshop the other day, Awaken the Inner Giant. It's in self-help, you can see it as like, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It's sort of self-orientated self-help. It's about goal achievement and striving and wanting to become rich and wanting to reach your full potential, but in a sort of reaching all your goals and becoming rich and becoming someone kind of way. That's what reaching your full potential means at Orange. What might a healthy integration look like? And this is something that Green, stage 6, we're going to cover on to that in a minute. This is something that Green can struggle with, just to point that out. I think a healthy integration of Orange looks like being good with money, having a good career, being smart in business, getting shit done, being strategic, tapping into our individual freedom while also retaining the ability to fit into society. Rational thinking. These are all healthy ways to integrate Orange. And if you don't integrate them, you might come across some issues. And so that's why I encourage healthy integration of all these levels, because each one provides us with something really, really important, that if we want to be whole individuals in the modern world, we ought to integrate as many as we can. Great, let's move on to stage 6. Our Orange life starts to fall apart, basically. We start to question the idea of achieving for ourselves, of reaching all our goals, of materialism, of striving to be rich and have social status and whatnot. And we start to become more sensitive. In terms of our psychology, we become more empathetic, and we start, instead of wanting just to improve ourselves, we start looking out to the world, and we start becoming angry at all the injustice in the world. We start developing an allergy to things like hierarchy and ranking and division and this person's better than that person and this group has no rights. These things start to really grate on us at Green. We value things like equality and inclusion, social justice, peace and love, diversity for its own sake, and so on. And this is really active. This is really starting to become active in the West. Some might say in a dysfunctional way, but hey, that's just the trajectory we're on. What's our worldview at this stage? An important part of it is that truth is relative. So it's not just science tells us the truth, or rationality is what we need if we want to find truth. We start to see that all of that is relative to sort of modern democracies in the modern world, and that other cultures at other points in history had their own truths, and we want to start reviving those. And we tend to sort of reject, it's not just that we relativize, it's also we tend to actually reject orange type truth. And we start going back to those earlier levels and trying to revive them in ourselves, but also trying to see the world through that lens. We also tend to see that life is about love and belonging rather than striving and competing and trying to be number one. We tend to say things like, if only we could all love each other, the world would be amazing. If only all humans lived in harmony. The John Lennon song Imagine is like one of the things that I recommend people do when they learn about Stage Green is that they listen to Imagine by John Lennon, because in there you can see a lot of the green, the motifs of green. And these are great values. It's a great worldview to have, but is it really realistic? I would say very unrealistic. Not in all countries, but in many countries, it's simply unrealistic right now. We see green especially in the most advanced countries, like the Scandinavian countries. We see it in other countries like Germany, the UK, the US, perhaps in places like California and Boulder, in sort of the liberal-leaning states and cities in America. We can see it in the middle class and university-educated people, in Google, who are all about diversion and inclusion. We see it in like modern social justice, which many people have criticized for verging into blue absolutism, but it sort of comes from green, even if it's perhaps getting dysfunctional according to some people. Look for themes of love and inclusion and diversity. We can see it in sort of hippies and spiritual groups that have those characteristics, tend to be quite green. Some of the footprints, so what are some of the characteristics of green that we might see? Things like sensitive communication, hugs and warm introductions, minimalism, simple clothes, cuddling strangers, crystals and incense and candles. These things are sort of the footprints of green. And I've talked in other videos about the good side and the bad side of green, but I just want to touch quickly on how we might healthfully integrate green. I think a really good thing about green is that we get this desire to really do good for the world. We start truly going beyond selfish motives or purely selfish motives. We also see the delusions of orange, like the delusions of materialism, of being a millionaire, of achieving for ourselves, of getting ever more money and success, seeing that this really isn't what life is about. And that can actually bring a bit of a crisis, but it's also a really crucial, in terms of our individual growth, it's crucial, and also in terms of human society moving forward, it's crucial that we move beyond orange at some point. And this, to me, is like the point where we can really tap into the deeper dimensions of being human. It's actually the bridge between what's called the first tier stages, which are stages 1 to 6, and the second tier stages, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. I think that's a good place to lead into the second tier. So what's this about first tier and second tier? Basically, if you look at the first tier stages, they're all about deficiency and lack. It's about gaining for myself, or it's about overcoming other people, or it's about persecuting others because they don't belong to my group, or it's about seeing deficiency in life and combating it in some way, whether it's deficiency out there, if it is deficiency in here. And if you look at the context in which these stages appear, you can see that, for example, in a historical point of view, they come up in societies that they don't have everything together. They don't have equality, or they don't have material success, or they don't have their basic needs met, or they don't have structure and lawfulness. And that sort of resonates with the psychology and worldview and values. It's like these two things complement each other. In a very fundamental way, each first tier level is monoperspectival. It can only see the world from their own perspective. And this becomes obvious when we move into second tier in our growth. Claire Graves actually said that at first tier we're not really human. He didn't, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm just taking what he said and describing it in a different way. But this is essentially what he said. We're not fully human. We're dominated by animal-like needs. And he called the jump to second tier a monumental leap in meaning. If you don't know who Claire Graves is, he created a theory that underlines a lot of the theory that we're looking at today. We can also look at the jump from first tier to second tier as a shift from scarcity to abundance motivation. Let's listen to Claire Graves. He says, quote, "The A-N- state, which is his name for stage 7, which is yellow, the first stage in second tier, develops when man has resolved the basic human fears, when man's need for respect of self, as well as others, reorganizes and revitalizes his capacities to do and to know. The 7th level of human behavior is actually the beginning of human life all over again on a new and different basis." End quote. So let's look at this first second tier level then. This is called yellow integrative, and it's going to be difficult in a way if you're not in that world, if you don't read books by people at this level, or if you don't listen to podcasts by people who embody this level. It's going to be hard to point this out to you because it's not very common right now. Where does this appear? It appears in the most developed countries. It's certainly active in Europe and America right now, not on a huge level, but all the people that I know who embody it, most of them are from those countries. The middle class, or even above, people who have been through orange, have been through green, and now on that basis they can start to build a yellow identity. Spiritual leaders often embody yellow and even beyond. The worldview at yellow is much different to the worldviews at the previous levels. Here we see that the world is multi-layered, that people are multi-dimensional. We start valuing connected big picture views as opposed to our little perspective on the world that has to be right, and the other people and the people who don't hold that view are enemies. That's basically what first tier is all about. We let go of that and we see things from a much bigger point of view. We can see the evolution in the world. We can see that evolution runs everything, and that evolution has brought us to where we are in our yellow consciousness. What do we value here? Yellow is more individualistic than collective, but we value self-expression without harming other people. We value the magnificence of life over having and doing. We value knowledge and competency rather than rank and power. So it's individualistic, but it's quite tempered. And actually we use our goals here are really to use to put to use our own drives and our own strengths to the good of the world. Not in the green way, which is kind of about feeling good and about helping the downtrodden and the needy. It's not always about that. It's about specializing in an area of life and seeing how we can improve that in a systematic long-term way. We value the long-term good of the world. We value all and self, not just the self or not just everyone else. We value everyone and we value ourselves. The psychology at this level is very different as well. We flow among the earlier levels. So we're not just identified with our own little level here, our own stage of development. we can actually flex and flow between them all, which is why I encourage it so much. Claire Graves noted a big falling away of compulsion and anxiety at this level. So it's a huge dropping away of fear, and it's sort of like a stepping into life in all of its glory and in all of its misery. We can adapt ourselves better to life circumstances. Obviously, this isn't going to be perfect, but at more than any other previous stage, because we're not locked into the perspective and the behavior and the values from any of those previous stages. Some of the footprints of yellow, if you're going to try and look for yellow out there or in yourself, look for complex and nuanced thinking that doesn't jump to conclusions based on a limited perspective. This is very, obviously being perfect at this isn't easy or maybe even possible, but notice just for a much bigger view, a much more complex and nuanced view of things. A focus on solutions rather than politics and manipulation. So yellow is very practical minded. It doesn't care about aggrandizing the self. It doesn't care about titles and status. It cares about getting things done and getting things done well for the good of others and for the good and for my own good, not in a compulsive way either. Also, big footprint is multi-perspectiveness. I've talked about this in my video on stage yellow. Yellow can see different perspectives, so it's not going to get lost in green's idealism. It's not going to get lost in orange's obsession with growth and rationality and so on. It's going to see that all of these things have their limitation and they have their benefit, and they need to be healthily integrated, and we need to be able to see the world from each of those points of view at different points in time. None of them are false entirely, but none of them are true entirely either. It's all about context, and those are some of the footprints that you can look for at yellow. Great. Let's move on to the final stage that we're going to cover today, which is stage 8, stage turquoise, and this is the second stage in second tier. At this stage, and I'm going to try to speak from experience, I'm not sure I can really, but yellow sees the world as systems, and it sees the world as being interconnected, causally interconnected. The worldview at turquoise goes a bit further than that. We're starting to see that life is one giant interconnected mind, but beyond systems. It's really going, we're really seeing the essence of life in everything as everything. We're seeing that life is alive, that everything is holistically connected, not just systemically. We're starting to see that wisdom drives living systems, and that everything is delicately interconnected in ways that we can't really understand fully, and that we have to sort of trust and live and breathe rather than trying to understand mentally. The values at this level involve finding the order beneath the chaos. Yellow is much more about looking at complexity and looking at how things work in a very sort of mechanical way, I would say. Here at turquoise, we sort of respect the holistic wisdom rather than the holistic wisdom behind things, rather than all the details and the complex, all the complex parts working together. It's really more about the holistic wisdom that is behind everything. We deeply integrate emotion with knowledge. We value both emotions and knowledge and bring them together. And we value a more embodied, holistic understanding of things. We value addressing global problems. The psychology at turquoise looks like an inner resonance with all first tier levels. So at yellow, although there's a deeper integration of all first tier levels than ever before, it's still a bit heady and it's a bit Like, oh yeah, I intellectually understand that level. I intellectually understand what it must be like to be that person. At turquoise, it goes much deeper, and it's more like I can actually live all of the levels at once in my being, and I can feel into them. I can embody all those levels. I can be present with all of them. And it's a much deeper appreciation for why all of those levels exist within us. The context in which this appears, the most advanced countries, spiritual leaders sometimes, thought leaders, people who are on the cutting edge of spirituality, of politics, of values development, and so on. It's really difficult to find them, but you can find them. It's just you need to know what you're looking for. The footprints are about seeing holistic wisdom, about deep resonance, about a new emotional, it's sort of a fusion of the emotional and the rational in a very profound way. It's a respect for all forms of wisdom, all tied together and all sort of filtered down into this lovely, holistic, wise way of viewing and of living life and of embodying everything that's come before in our own development. I just want to say at turquoise, there's really not a lot of data. So the descriptions I've given might seem a bit, a bit threadbare, a bit like you could have given me more information. I know, but I'm not sure I embody much of turquoise, and we have a long way to go before we see turquoise emerging on a broad scale, and before we really get it, before it really impacts human society. You could say the same about yellow as well, in a way. So look for it in your own growth and look for it out there, but realize that it might be quite scarce. Great. I think that's a good point to wrap up. So if you want to look at each of these levels in further detail, I have a series of free articles talking about each of them on the website. I'll link to those in the description, totally free. I also have, if you want to go even deeper, I have an 8-hour course on the stages of human development, which actually goes even beyond turquoise. Sign up to the GU members area for that. I'll leave a link in the description. And actually, I include many more theories than just spiral dynamics in that course. Let me know if there are any insights that you can add to my ideas. Let me know in the comments what other insights you have. And do subscribe for more personal development content. And also don't forget to come over to thegreatupdraft.com and check out what I've got there. Thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you around.